Okay, so in order to style this, we're going to take this section by section first. First, we're going to style the input, and then we'll style the button, and then the full component just so it ends up looking like our final sign-in. So what we have to do is we actually have to make a new form input component. And it's going to perform the exact same way as a regular input, but with our own styling on it, including managing the label and that little micro interaction when you click on it. So how do we do this? Well, let's first make a new component called form input. And we're going to make our form input.component.jsx and a form input.styles.sass as usual. And inside of our form input, it will be a functional component, because we don't want any state on this component. What it will take is it will take a handle change prop, a label, and then the rest of the props we're going to destructure, because we're going to spread that into the input. Now, the reason why we need this handle change is because we want to bubble up any on change that the input has. But we're going to wrap our whole component in a group, because we want the label and the input to be together. So this is going to be called a group. And then there will always exist an input. And the input will have the class name of form input. On change will then bind our handle change. So right now this looks exactly like how we had it earlier inside of our sign-in component. We're still just binding whatever handle change gets passed in onto the on change. And then we're going to spread the other props here. So all these other props will end up being all of the props that we've passed in here, including name, type, value, required. Those are all going to get passed into our form input component as the other props. Now, why do we need this label prop? Well, with this label prop, we are actually going to selectively render a label, because we don't know if we actually need it or not. If a user passes in a label, right? Or sorry, if a developer, if we want to pass in a label property, then we'll generate one. If we don't, then there's no need for it. So we are going to create a label component. Otherwise, we are going to render nothing. And null is a great way for nothing to appear. So here, what we're going to render is our label with a class name of this value. So what we're going to do is we are going to selectively render a string interpolated value where we take props.value.length. So if our value is in, then we are going to apply this class of shrink. Otherwise, it will be an empty string, and we will always have form input label. Other props. So this label will always have the class name, form input label, but we will also add this shrink property whenever the user has typed anything in. Now, this is mainly for certain browsers that will autocomplete when you get to that portion of the actual sign-in page. I'm going to show you what I mean, but we're also going to render the label text. Now, as usual, I've provided the styling for us. And I'm just going to quickly take a look at what is here. So what we're saying is that this is a Sass variable. Wherever we call subcolor is going to substitute into that gray. Wherever we call main color it's going to substitute in black. And then this mixin shrink label is an easy way for us to include this whole block of CSS where everywhere we say @include and then that shrink label, that mixin. So mixins are kind of like reusable pieces of CSS that we can put inside of our Sass code. And this way we don't have to repeat the same thing, and if we wanted to change anything, we could just modify it here, and wherever it's being referenced, it'll update. Now, the main thing to focus on that we've changed is that we want to focus whenever a user focuses, which is whenever they select or whenever the browser is focused on that input, then we want to target the form input label, and we want to include shrink label, right? So we want to move it up, change the font size, and change the color. Because right now, our label actually sits inside of our component, as you'll see here. Right? It just sits right above the actual input itself. So by doing this, we are adding a transition right here of 300 milliseconds so that the moment these properties get updated, there's a transition of 300 milliseconds to that change. And now if we save and we export our form input, if we add it into our sign-in component, we will see our new component in our code. Form input from form input component. Now let's just replace this with this, like so. And now instead of an on change, we are going to add in our handle change, because that's the name that we decided to call our property. And now if we look at our code base, we'll see that this is our new component. So we also need to now add in our label. So here I'm going to say email. And then for this label, I'm also going to say password. If we save again, let's not update that password. We see our functionality. Awesome. So let's get rid of this label and this label. And now our form input looks how it should. So why is the width full? And it's because it always just expands the full width of our component. So for our sign-in component, we can actually also add some styling here so that the width is always 30 view width. So it's always 30% of the total view width. And now we have a better looking component that looks way more similar to our final. Okay, now let's style the button.